What's up everyone? It's Jeremy, and after a lot of hard work, I finally got a game shelf worth bragging about. And no, I don't mean the collection it contains, I'm referring to the shelf itself. For the longest time, I was using this crappy bookcase thing we had lying around the house, and it wasn't ideal whatsoever. It didn't fit that many games, attracted dust like crazy, and took up a lot of space. This bedroom isn't very big, and that thing was way too deep. I had to start putting games in front of other games, which is the last thing any collector wants to do. And even in doing that, I still had to keep my NES, Super Nintendo, and N64 games on my desk. So I finally decided that enough was enough. If I was going to make this room work, I needed a new game shelf. But considering the size of this room, any old manufactured game shelf wouldn't make the most of this space, so I went all in and built my own game shelf. Keep in mind, I had never done anything like this before. I just went all in, gave it my best shot, and learned along the way, and this is what we ended up with. I am very happy with the end result, so I figured I'd share the building process with you guys and share everything I did to hopefully help you out if you're deciding to take on a similar project. I broke the entire process into 6 simple steps that I've timestamped for this video, so feel free to jump around and watch wherever you need some guidance. And if you're not super interested in the building process and just want to see what this shelf contains, that's timestamped as well, so feel free to skip to that point in the video. Let's get to building. Before you can get started with any kind of construction, you need to know exactly what you want, how you want it to look, and figure out how you're going to build it, which is why step 1 is planning. You need to draw it out, get your vision on paper, and get down some dimensions. Take measurements, figure out how big you want it to be, how many shelves you want, how tall you want them, things like that. And if you're horrible at drawing, don't worry, so am I. That's why I use this online SketchUp tool for designing. This program may look complex, but it really isn't. I went to sketchup.com and used their free online modeling tool to design my shelf and had no prior knowledge of how to use it, and that being considered, I think my design came out alright. If you're struggling with the program, just look up a tutorial on YouTube and you should figure it out in no time. For my shelf, I decided to use 3/4 inch plywood for the entire thing and make it 7 feet tall, 8 3/4 inches deep, and 22 inches long. I drew in 9 shelves that vary in height for different console libraries, which is really the beauty of making your own shelf. You get to envision where you want everything to go and design it exactly how you want. I then drew some sheets of plywood on the side to map out where I'd make my cuts and figure out which sizes to buy to get the most out of each board, finally deciding on a 4 foot by 8 foot sheet and a 2 foot by 4 foot sheet. I knew I wanted the shelf to have face pieces, but I didn't bother drawing those on, and you shouldn't either. Drawing it out is just to give you the dimensions for your cuts. Cosmetic things like face pieces don't need to be drawn, but they do need to be accounted for, and you should calculate how much you need before you go out to the hardware store. Be sure to make a list of everything you're going to need so you don't have to stop what you're doing to drive out to the store 100 times and grab something you forgot you needed. Include things like the sheets of plywood you're using, the face piece boards, some dowels for the shelves, screws, sandpaper, polyurethane to finish the wood, and things of that nature. When you've got everything figured out and you go and grab all your materials, you're ready to move on to step 2, cutting the pieces. Now there's a ton of fancy saws out there that you can use to get specific cuts done very efficiently, but all you really need is a circular saw and a straight edge to cut against. I started with cutting my side pieces, using the back piece as a straight edge to get a nice and accurate cut. Start by measuring out the distance you need, in this case 8 inches, and make sure you take into consideration the distance on the actual saw from the blade to the edge. On this particular circular saw, it was 1 1/4 inches, so add that to the 8 and get 9 1/4, and mark that spot on either end of the sheet. Then grab the straight edge, line it up with each mark you made, and clamp it down tightly. You don't want that moving while you're cutting. Before you even think about cutting though, make sure you've got safety gear on and understand how dangerous a moving blade is. These don't just kill you in Mario Maker, it will take your fingers off, so be careful. Press the side of the saw against the straight edge and turn on the saw. Make sure to let it get to full speed before you start cutting or it won't cut right. Once that thing's flying, move it slowly and cautiously along the straight edge and bring it through to the other end of the board. Then boom, side piece done. I'm not going to walk through piece by piece, but that's the same process I went through for the majority of cuts. For a couple, I use this miter saw because it's great for cutting smaller pieces efficiently and gives you a perfectly straight edge every time. But this isn't necessary at all and won't even work for most cuts. The only reason I used it is because my dad had one and it made some of the cuts easier. Every cut can be done with a normal circular saw just fine, so don't worry if you don't have more than that, it's plenty. And I know I said I had no experience with this kind of thing, which is true, but my dad does, and he showed me the best and safest way to do all of this. I'm just sharing my key takeaways from his teachings and this project to hopefully help you out. Anyways, there's not much more to explain than that for cutting your pieces. It just takes a lot of time. Just remember, measure twice, cut once. There's no undo button on a blade unfortunately, so make sure you double check everything before putting the saw to it. Once you've got all your pieces cut, you can move on to step 3, mapping your shelves. Now, I originally just planned to screw in each shelf, but then the sides would be covered in screws and not look as nice. Now you can still do that, but I instead opted to drill holes a little lower than the shelf was going to be and wedge 1/4 inch dowels in for the shelves to rest on, and that's what I recommend you do too. It looks a lot cleaner, allows you the flexibility to move the shelves in the future, and it's easier to make, so it's a win-win-win. You have to be very careful though. If these holes are just the slightest bit off, the shelf won't rest right and it'll be super wobbly, so it's important to be very precise. The key to drilling the holes properly is making some sort of jig that serves as a guide to each one. Grab some scrap wood, cut a piece just a bit shorter than the width of the side piece that the shelf is going to rest on, and draw a straight line across the length of it, extending down to the other end. Then measure 2 inches from the edge on each side and mark it on the line accordingly. That'll be how far each peg will be from the front and back of the shelf. Now if you've got a wider shelf, I recommend measuring a bit further, and the opposite applies for something more narrow. Then you drill out a 1/4 inch hole at those spots, and attach a small piece of wood at the end to give it an edge to press against the corner and line up properly, which forms this T-shaped jig that makes this entire process so much easier. Now all you have to do is measure down to where you want each peg to be centered and mark it. When measuring from the top, make sure to account for the shelf width and where each peg will be. So if I wanted the first shelf to be 9 inches tall, I'd have to measure down 3/4 inch for the top, 9 inches for the shelf space, 3/4 inch for the shelf itself, and 1/8 inch for the dowel. To make the measuring a little easier, I calculated the dowel was 1/4 inch because it made a nice 10 3/4, and as long as the shelves are evenly spaced out, I don't care about that 1/8 of an inch, it'll hold my games the same. Once you've figured out where you want each of the pegs to be centered, mark that spot with a little line that up with the line on the jig, and drill the holes accordingly. To make sure I didn't drill too deep and go through the board, I wrapped my drill bit in tape to tell me when the hole was deep enough. Since the jig was 3/4 inch thick and I wanted the holes on the side to be a 1/2 inch deep, I taped the bit at 1 1/4 inches and stopped drilling whenever it reached the wood. The most time consuming part of this part was definitely making the jig, but it made the rest of it so easy that I really can't complain considering how straight the shelves came out. With those holes drilled for the shelves, it's finally time to move on to step 4, assemble the shelf. To start, I attach the sides to the back, and I recommend you also attach whatever sides are longer first. My side pieces are 3/4 inch thick, so to make sure the screws go through the middle of them from the back, you divide that in half, which is 3/8 of an inch, and measure that from the edge all the way down. I marked it from either end and used a chalk line to mark the entire thing because it's a lot easier than using a straight edge all the way down. When you do that for all 4 sides, you can set that on your side pieces and put a screw every foot or so, but if you're not very experienced in drilling like myself, I'd recommend pre-drilling all your screws just to make sure everything goes smoothly. And every time you go to put a screw in, make sure the edges are flush with each other, because once it's screwed, it's staying there, and if it's not lined up, you're screwed. Not actually, you just have to unscrew that one, move it over a little, correct the edges, and drill it, but that leaves an open hole, and it's just not ideal. Once you do that for the sides, you can go ahead and do the same thing for the top and bottom pieces, but I'd like to point out the mistake I made and how I figured out how to make it work. So, I originally had all my shelves designed to be 8 inches deep, but decided I wanted face pieces on the shelves too, so I cut them all to 7 inches deep to account for it. In that original design though, the top and bottom pieces had the same dimensions as the shelves, so I grouped them together, and when I made that adjustment, I included those pieces in on it too, despite them not being shelves. And what I was left with was a top and bottom piece that were 1 inch too shallow. Now you could go out and buy more wood to make the piece you need, but that's a lot of money, and for something that small, sometimes it's better to find other solutions. I had a scrap piece that I was able to cut into a new piece for the top, but I unfortunately didn't have enough for a new bottom piece, so I grabbed some scrap wood to make a piece that was the proper size to fill the gap. It was a bit off though, so I had to use these little wood strips to fill the tiny gap. I just glued it in and drilled it to the shelf. I only explained that this happened to show that mistakes will happen. Sometimes you'll measure something a tiny bit off, or you'll completely jank something up and you'll have to find a way to make it work. This isn't a bad thing though, you just gotta critically think and find a solution, but it's fun and your solutions add character to what you're building and make your piece truly unique. But back to constructing. If you want to give your shelf more support than just attaching everything to the back, you can attach the side pieces to the top pieces. Again, you can go right in with a screw, but that won't look very clean, so I used this fancy drilling tool that allows screws to come in at an angle, which lets the screw holes be at the top and bottom, aka where you can't see them. If you don't have this tool, don't worry about it, but I would recommend connecting the top and bottom pieces to the side pieces in some way, whether that be a screw or nail. And with that done, that's it for the necessary stuff. You could throw the dowels in right now and call your shelf complete, but if you want it to look really nice and be properly finished, you'll want to continue and move on to step 5, face pieces, which is totally optional. This is a cosmetic thing, so if that's not part of your design or you don't want these, skip to step 6. Now, I wanted a 1.5 inch piece to go all around the front face and a 1 inch piece on each shelf, which required the use of a table saw. I'm sure there's other ways to cut something like this, but again, this is the easiest way and I'm lucky enough to have access to my dad's tools, so I set the thing to the proper width and cut my pieces. I bought these two 1x4x8s and it was actually just enough for what I wanted to do, so it worked out great. I'm sure you could buy them the exact length you want, not have to worry about the table saw or anything like that, but it was cheaper for me this way. Once you've got the face pieces to the proper width, you gotta measure how much you need for every face, which should have been done in step 1, and cut those pieces to the right length, which I again used the miter saw for. To attach them to the frame, lay down some wood glue, line up the board, and nail it down with the nail gun from one end to the other, making sure each spot you nail is perfectly flush with the edge. Then I did the same with the shelves, gluing the face piece on the front of each one and nailing it a few times to keep it there. This made each of my shelves 7 3/4 inches deep, but the frame has room for 8 inches, leaving a 1/4 inch space between the front of the shelf and the back of the face piece on each end. Since that piece hangs off about an inch, there's room to stick LED lights around the whole shelf that face the back and you won't even see them. I bought this 16-inch strip, which should fit perfectly considering each side is 7 feet and the middle is around 2 feet, but we can't put those in until the very end. With all the main construction done, all that's left to do is move on to step 6, finishing your shelf, which for me consisted of sanding and giving it a coat of polyurethane. This part's really time consuming, but straightforward. The shelves are put together and everything now is just polishing it up. For sanding, you could do it by hand, but that would take a lot longer, so I'd say use one of those electric sanders if you've got one. It makes it go by so much faster and leaves the wood silky smooth. Once it's sanded, you can paint or stain it, whatever you decided will look better in your room, but I really love this natural wood look of it, so I decided not to mess with the color. I still wanted to protect and finish the wood though, so I threw a coat of this allegedly triple thick polyurethane on the entire thing and let it sit overnight. It would probably be fine like that, but to enforce the seal, I threw a second coat on it, let that dry for another day, then moved it into my room, stuck the lights around the inside, threw the shelves in, and let that sit like that for a few days to let it fully dry. If you start putting things in too early and it doesn't dry all the way, you can damage your stuff, so I waited a few days to ensure it was totally safe to put my games in. I only put the lights in because I figured the polyurethane still sealing could only help the lights stay stuck to the shelf. Probably didn't do anything, but regardless, I wanted to see how those LEDs looked. After around a week in all, I was finally able to set up my display in this brand new custom game shelf, which I figured I'd give you an in-depth look at now. And here it is, my finished custom video game shelf. I could not be happier with how this thing came out. I had a vision, and now it's a reality in my bedroom. This thing is... I honestly did not envision it to look this good finished. Like just take a peek at the sides here. Like, they're so smooth, and it's so nice. But I'll give you a little tour of the contents of the shelf. That's probably what you're interested in. So up top, we've got my Xbox stuff because I don't have a ton of it. There's still some room to grow, but we got OG Xbox 360. I don't have an Xbox One, but these games were cheap. And I'm highlighting Futurama on the end here because it's like a $100 game, and I'm very happy to have it. If you want to see a video on the game, like a review kind of video, let me know in a comment, and I'll consider it. Then we moved down to NES. I had these games stacked on my desk for the longest time, and now I've actually got a shelf for them. It's awesome. But we got NES, leading to Super Nintendo. I don't have a ton of NES stuff, but Super Nintendo pretty decent. I got my King K. Rool amiibo there. It's Donkey Kong Country, best game on Super Nintendo. Maybe the second one, I don't know. But we got some more Super Nintendo. Now N64, these don't have end labels, I didn't buy them, and the games don't to begin with, as you know, so I was gonna put them like standing up like this, the same as the other ones, but I opted not to. I think it's better to have them this way, because at least showing off some of the art. They're still alphabetized, it goes, I got Banjo here, C, and then it just continues going. These didn't fit though perfectly, so these are kind of at a slant, but I don't care, you'd never know. Down here though, this is the nice shelf. I just have this here temporarily. I don't know what to put here right now. There's room to grow. If I get a really cool statue, I'll definitely put it there if it's smaller. But here's my boxed Super Nintendo and N64 games. This is like my pride and joy right here. Especially this one. Look at that. Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past complete. It's awesome, but I have the shelves on the white light right now because it just looks the best. As you can see, the lights are on the sides there. I'm going to keep it on white. That's usually what I have it on. I'll change the colors at the end to give you guys a look at that. But moving down, we got a little Sega spot with the PS1 Classic just because I wanted it there. Sonic Adventure 2. Video on that game coming for the 20th anniversary of Sonic Adventure 2, so stay tuned for that in June. 2 Genesis games, still don't have a Genesis. That's okay, we got my tiny Dreamcast collection here. Moving on to PS1. How shiny those look. And then full shelf of games. PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4. Little Crash Bandicoot in the cart. But look at this shelf though. Look at how that looks. Like, that is so nice and full. Like, just wow. I love this. Oh, and in the bottom, I decided to put my DVDs in here. Since all like the box things take up a lot of space, I put all the bigger box stuff, like shows, at the bottom. I haven't covered that spot I said with the filler yet. But I'll figure something out. It's not really bothering me too bad right now. But we got my movies. Awesome Spider-Man trilogy on Blu-ray, as well as the 2 new movies, if you're hyped about the new Spider-Man movie coming in December. I forget what it's called, but drop a comment, spread some hype of that movie. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the contents of the shelf. So I'll change the colors now and give you guys a look at that. Here's the remote. They're Go-V lights if you want to get yourself a set of them. They're not super expensive at all, though. I think there's like 16 bucks for the 16 feet, and they're Bluetooth, but I haven't synced that up yet. This remote only has like red, green, blue, and then the white, and there's like different modes and stuff. I haven't really figured out how it works yet, but give you a look at the red. I don't like the red a whole lot, but it looks cool. The green, I vibe to this green for sure. Like, look at that with the green. Like, oh, that is awesome. And then I don't mind the blue. I don't mind the blue. Blue's definitely cool, but there's some other colors that aren't on buttons here. That teal looks nice. There's the pink. I think there's a yellow I don't mind. Yeah, that's pretty nice too. But we're gonna set this on a fade, and we're gonna turn off the lights to give you a look at this thing in the dark. So hold up. Here's the beautiful game shelf in the dark room. Look at this thing. The lights cycling through the colors. Just nothing but games and movies. Just awesome media. This is so awesome. This is like my dream come true. This is the perfect game shelf. My dream game shelf is in my room. Oh, this thing's so... I was gonna say fucking awesome, but I didn't want to get demonetized. So it is so effing awesome. Look at that. But yeah, it's done, and I really could not be happier with how it came out. Seeing this thing that I thought up become a physical thing that I built with my bare hands feels so incredible. I really can't explain it. And seeing it house a bunch of my favorite video games makes that feeling even better. This is now the highlight of my game room, and I hope I've been able to help you build the highlight of yours.